I did have this idea in my head that like, if I can climb Everest without oxygen, I will then have everything. Nobody will be able to say a single thing about my deservingness. Nobody will ever be able to question my competence, my skill set. I also was like really unsure if I could do it. I was really starting to have to confront that. And then I wasn't like a well-liked person by my people in my community because I was really struggling internally with some really dark stuff. And I ultimately like reached a point where, I was really unsure what the point of anything was, because I'd sort of like realized that all of this accolades chasing and all this achievement chasing was so empty.
Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
Welcome back to episode 28 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. On today's episode, we've got an awesome conversation with Melissa Arnot Reid. Melissa is obviously very well tied to Mount Everest and the Mount Everest climbing season. She's a staple in the climbing community and has such a massive history with Mount Everest. But her interview is also very timely, not only because it is Everest season and Everest is really kicking off and in the swing of things, but also she has a new book titled Enough that came out in early April. Adrian and I had a chance to read the book before our interview with Melissa and really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation with Melissa, so we hope you stay tuned and enjoy the interview. Normally, Adrian and I have a little bit of time to catch up on these episodes, but he is across the world, about 12 hours and 45 minutes behind, I believe it is. I can never figure out the time change exactly. He is in Tibet. So we were able to get a couple updates from him, and we'll start off with just what's been going on over the last few days.
Yes, Sam, I am not in Lake Tahoe anymore. I'm at Everest Base Camp on the north side of the mountain in Tibet, China. We left, I left about a week ago, traveled to Chengdu, met our entire Alpenglow Expeditions group here, 16 of us all together, foreign climbers. And then we traveled to Lhasa, spent a few days going across the Tibetan Plateau, which was just beautiful, visiting sites like the Potala Palace and Jokong Monastery. And then yesterday did the final bit of the drive into base camp. The other half of our team, 16 Sherpa, have been working in base camp for the last week. They crossed the border by road from Kathmandu and have set up just an incredible base camp. So we rolled in, had our first day kind of, surviving, getting used to 17,200 feet and settling in. Woke up this morning to just perfect bluebird, no wind day with epic views of the entire north face of Mount Everest, the summit 12,000 feet above us. So the group is stoked. Everything's been so smooth so far.
It's really an interesting time of the season. All the teams go over to the Himalaya and they get all psyched, and there's all this pent-up enthusiasm around the Everest season beginning. And then there's this really kind of drawn out pause as the travel progresses, as progress up the mountain goes along. And while there's a lot of excitement, back stateside, hearing about what's going on the mountain, we can often feel a little bit disconnected. We've got great resources out there in Explorer's Web and Alan Arnett's blog and other resources, but there's not a whole ton of excitement until teams are actually making their summit pushes. So this is a little bit of a kind of transitionary, I don't want to say dead period, but there's just not quite as much going on and we're not hearing quite as much. So one, it's really cool that we're getting updates from Adrian live from the mountain. And two, it's kind of interesting to get that insider perspective from someone that's actually there in person versus just what we're hearing through the media. So a couple news topics that Adrian brought up and we've been following along.
Updates from the mountain. Really, my first focus is on our team. Since COVID, this is now our third kind of climbing season. One spring last year, fall last year, and now spring again this year. Third climbing season since Tibet reopened after COVID. And things have just gotten so much smoother. The government systems are all back in place. The immigration and police and military kind of checkpoints are used to foreign climbers again and super supportive and excited we're here. The hotels and road infrastructure continue to get better and better as China prepares for more tourists to visit the Everest National Park on the north side. So it's been a great, smooth trip so far. We're waiting for things to get hard. And yeah, like selfishly, the other news is just like how prepared our group is. Alpenglow Expeditions tries really hard to pre-qualify climbers, and the vast majority have climbed with us quite a bit in the past. So we just have a strong group that's ready to be here and taking good care of themselves so far. And that sort of ties into what I think the biggest news is. A lot of people have been hearing and asking about the new rules Nepal has proposed, including having to climb a 7,000 meter peak before climbing Mount Everest. And that rule is just something I'm so excited about. Of course, Nepal has struggled with execution of their rules in the past. And even this one, I think, needs some tweaking. They're thinking only a 7,000 meter peak in Nepal would qualify you for Everest. I think, of course, we should include peaks in South America and in Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan and other places. So I think there's some like tweaking to the rule that needs to happen. But overall, truly believe Nepal's heart is in the right place. And they are trying to get control of the mess that is the south side of the mountain right now. And this rule is an essential step. It's a rule that, China has had for years and years. You have to climb a 7,000 meter peak before climbing Everest. And Alpenglow's lived by it since we started. We actually, for most of Alpenglow's history, have required an 8,000 meter peak before climbing Everest, with very few exceptions. And so, I think the rule could be even stiffer. We could require an 8,000 meter peak before Everest, and that would be way better for the mountain and safety and success rates. But I can understand where 7,000 meter peak is a fair place to end up from a government regulation. And I really hope they institute it and they enforce it.
Great hearing about how the Chinese side is really kicking off this kind of re-entry into the north side of Mount Everest and Tibet with a lot of positivity. I think, there was a lot of negative reactions to how long China was closed after COVID. And, it was really a challenge for businesses and for guides that worked predominantly on the north side of the mountain. And while that was certainly a struggle, the fact that they've made such great efforts to make the north side experience so positive and the infrastructure improvements are so significant, it's really awesome to hear that pause was valuable in the long run. So awesome to hear that from the north side of the mountain. And I think the news out of the Tibetan side is really interesting. As Adrian mentions, there's conversations about new regulations requiring climbers to have 7,000 meter climbing experience before they can climb Mount Everest from the south side. There's a couple factors here. Certainly Nepal has made many, many, many attempts at regulations, similar and different, over the years. And as Adrian mentions, the enforcement is really the struggle time and time again. And so hopefully this one sticks a little bit. That said, I do struggle with it a little bit. I think some of these regulations are awesome, but it kind of goes back to the style conversation that we have time and time again. And I think I really believe that it's important that climbers have the necessary experience and qualifications to climb a mountain like Mount Everest, or really any challenging, technical, dangerous mountain around the world. That said, I think there should be some responsibility put on the climber themselves to meet those personal requirements rather than have these check boxes that need to be checked in order to qualify through the government. I think the government oversight is proven that it is important because fatalities on the mountain are often linked to inexperience. That said, that is kind of an issue in and of itself. And so having more and more of these requirements just means that as soon as people check these boxes, they're allowed to go out on the mountains. And part of me wonders if that is perpetuating the issue a little bit, because all someone needs is one 7,000 meter experience to be qualified rather than actually have proper time put in to gain the experience. I think some people can gain the necessary experience in one climb, and other people need 3, 4, 5 climbs under their belt before they truly have that experience necessary. So a little bit of an interesting one there, but it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. This is definitely not a rule for the 2025 climbing season. It might be enforced in 2026, and that's what we'll have to wait and see.
And then the other news is just, progress happening on both sides of the mountain. I think the south side of the mountain has 400 and something foreign permits with probably 600 Sherpa, so 1,000 climbers. The north side has 48 foreign climbers, 28 Chinese climbers, supported by, let's say, around 100 Sherpa. So, we're a little under 200 climbers. And things are progressing. Rope fixing on the Tibetan side has already gone up to 7,800 meters. On the south side, we've heard it's made it to 7,400 meters. And there's been a bunch of snow over the past few days in a really positive way. The mountains were quite dry, and snow is going to help make the climbing more efficient and safer once climbers get up high. So kind of a normal season so far, but it's also very early in the season at the beginning of May. So I'm just excited to start moving with my team, getting up higher and seeing things progress.
Again, it's really cool to be getting these real-time live updates out of Adrian. Certainly, some of this information is percolating through the world of mountaineering, and we're hearing about it in the States, but it's not the most exciting updates. And so oftentimes we don't catch this information, or we don't totally get to hear about it. Certainly, the progress on the mountain is awesome. We'd heard about a very dry season to start when teams arrived. And then I know that recently it's been quite weathery. And so a lot of climbers, especially on the south side, actually went down to lower elevations using helicopters to just rest and recover at a more manageable, sustainable elevation, as the weather just didn't really allow anyone to get too high on the mountain. But progress is being made, and that snow, as Adrian mentioned, is really actually a good thing. Oftentimes we hear about fresh snow this time of the season, and it's not ideal. But at the same time, with such a dry start to the season, having a little bit of fresh snow and hopefully some accumulation that stacks up on the mountains might actually help the climbing conditions once it stabilizes from an avalanche standpoint. So we'll be staying in the loop with Adrian and hearing about their progress on the mountain, but really exciting to follow along on this season. It's poised to be both a busy one, but also a great one. So that's the update direct from Mount Everest Base Camp, and stay tuned for our awesome interview with Melissa Arnot Reid. Welcome back to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. Today's guest is Melissa Arnot Reid. Melissa, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm psyched to be able to chat with you guys.
Yeah, it's a good time. You've got a new book coming out. I looked at your website to kind of get help with your bio, and you say you're a guide, a speaker, and an author. And my first thought was, wait, she's an athlete first and foremost. And I think, obviously your website, you're promoting yourself from a business standpoint, but I really think of you as an athlete. You've obviously pursued this sport as a guide, and that's, how you're known most notably in the world. But some of your most impressive feats are as an athlete. And I think that's really important. And then lately you've been pursuing other aspects of the sport in trail running and exploring the mountains personally. And I think that really speaks to you as an athlete and your joy for the mountains. You are the first American to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. You've got over 6 ascents of Everest. You've got an incredible resume, including hundreds of ascents of Mount Rainier. And we're really excited to talk to you and talk about your new book, Enough.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. I think about mountaineering particularly, or I guess even like ultra long distance trail running, as not a sport as much as an activity. Like, unpopular opinion here, it's more like coloring. It's not like, I think of a sport as like tennis is a sport, like soccer, football is a sport. And what I do is just like a silly little activity that's really personally motivated. So I've gone back and forth, like I have referred to myself as an athlete, but it's always felt a little silly to me because I'm like, I'm just a person doing silly things outside. So it's more of I'm a pursuer of silly activities repetitiously, I would like to say.
Yeah,
that doesn't really go on the website very well.
Yeah, it doesn't flow. But running is such a core thing. Like, everyone knows how to run in some way, shape, or form, whether that's fast or slow or long or short. And so it's like, is it a sport or is it just part of being a human being?
Yeah, I mean, my relationship with running has been very interesting personally, because I grew up, actually when I was in high school, there was like a boy that I liked who told me that I wasn't a runner. I was like, wait, but I go running almost every day. And he was like, no, you don't. I'm like, no, I run 2 miles every day. And he was like, no, you don't. There's no way you do. And I inherited this belief that like I am not a runner, and also that I really don't like running. And so I continued to run as a form of training. for my whole entire, dabblings in outdoor activities, because it was just such a useful, generally free activity minus the cost of shoes. And it was a solo activity. And I've really been drawn towards things I can do alone. I spend a lot of time alone. I like to spend a lot of time alone, but I never have felt like I was a runner. And I had this revelation, one day kind of recently, actually, awkwardly, where I don't know how many thousands of miles I've run, but I was like, I think I'm a runner. Like, I think I actually can say I'm a runner now.
You've made it.
Yeah, I've made it in my own mind. I've like passed my own barrier of, I am now a runner. But the one thing that has shifted pretty hugely for me in many ways on my journey, and this applies to more than just running, of course, but especially with running, I notice it, is I used to use running as a form slightly of punishment and mental training, really. Like, I didn't enjoy it, or I at least told myself I wasn't enjoying it. And it's really hard. And I would kind of like berate myself, like, you deserve to be suffering right now. You deserve to be experiencing something hard, and it's going to make you more able to experience other hard things. And at some point in sort of my personal interior healing journey, it really shifted into being something that is really just joyful. It's just a really good excuse to be either outside with friends, seeing really amazing places, or outside alone and reflecting. And it doesn't have that same sort of punishment principle to it.
That's so interesting. We actually had like a question that aligned with that as an answer for later on in the episode. And so we're going to come back to that. It's running is an interesting part of what we do as, mountain athletes. And we're going to tag that and come back to it for sure.
Yeah.
Hi, Melissa. I didn't even get to say hi yet, but so good to have you on here. And it's so funny. We started with like sport versus activity, because that's actually something I think we could do podcasts on.
Yeah.
Sam and I spend a reasonable amount of time debating like what's okay or what's not okay, quote unquote, okay in the mountains, whether it's like doping or oxygen use or helicopters, or, what defines an ascent versus not an ascent. And a lot of those things, and I love those debates, probably just because I love arguing. But I think a lot of that does come from, is this a sport where therefore we need very clear rules and what's okay and what's not okay, so we can compare our kind of like achievements across a level playing field, versus, is this an activity and we should just be going out and doing whatever feels good to us in the mountains, provided we're not hurting other people in the ways that we're climbing, or the environment, and doing these things much more for ourselves versus the outside world.
Yeah, it's something interesting, because in my really early guiding career working on Mount Rainier, I was guiding climbs that were fundraisers sometimes for various nonprofits. And so like I can think of the climb for clean air and breast cancer fundraising climb and a Fred Hutch climb and things like that. And I felt, and even my first trip to Everest, I was working as an assistant guide with a single client, and his intent on the climb was to bring awareness to Product Red and this sort of like global business model that was being used to encourage consumers to do good with their dollars. And I had this really maybe cynical side interior that was saying like, we aren't really climbing for clean air. We're not necessarily climbing for breast cancer research. We're climbing because our egos desire achievement, and we like personal challenge, and maybe we like being outside. And it's nice to frame selfish activities with altruism, because I think it makes us feel better about being selfish. But I've always felt pretty important that we lean into being able to be selfish, because if we don't do anything for pure joy, then who do we become? Joyless people. And it's okay to want to achieve things. Like I say this, obviously, Adrian, we are in the middle of, I just sadly was reminded how the public views Everest I have so many opinions on it, of course, like any of us who've worked there a lot have, but the things that people say about Everest climbers that I really am curious about, like the origin point of people's outrage with the trash, because I just want to be like, this is like a 2002 problem that we're talking about now, and it's like 2025, 100%. And the crowds, I'm like, oh my God, Mount Blanc, the crowds, any summit day, like honestly, Mount Rainier, the death, it's like people are going to die in places, like inevitably we all are. And I know there's part of me that's justifying this place that I really love because it has so many facets that people don't care about and won't look at because they're so obnoxiously boring and no one wants to hear about that stuff. They want to be, really captivated by like a very long queue of climbers that's a moment in time that has some really unsatisfying probably answers about the why, right? Like if you really want to know why the Everest is crowded, it's probably because of technological advances and better internet and better forecasting models. It really probably has nothing to do with the actual numbers because they haven't increased that great over the last 20 years incrementally every year. But it is like I have this, I don't know, this defense of wanting to teach my clients and also be allowed to myself say, like, why am I doing this? I wish I had some big and deep answer. And I know that I do in some ways, and we all do, but also just because I like it and I want to. And getting to the summit of things, it probably satisfies some like weird little lizard brain part of me that needs to feel a sense of autonomy and achievement. And that's okay too. I don't need to like be solving cancer because that's not what my work on this earth is probably.
Absolutely. I mean, the beauty is I think of myself as a very simple person sometimes and kind of like the joys and pleasures and things I desire. And what is easier than to like understand than wanting to stand on top of a mountain, like this high point that's hard to get to. And then if you get on one, then why not go to a higher one and a higher one and a higher one? So certainly for me, it was a very easy goal pyramid to understand.
And I would like to also just say, I know there's probably somebody listening right now who's like rolling their eyes and saying like, ugh, the privilege, that you just get to do the things you want to do because you feel like doing them. Like, must be nice to have a life of leisure where you can just go walk uphill and, pat yourself on the back and let people clap for you. And I counter, yes, true. It is an incredible place of privilege, but I can speak to my experience is, the mountains and that desire. It wasn't about, singularly getting a sense of achievement. It was about a sense of survival, honestly. And it didn't come from this, innate place of privilege where I just had no real problems. So I had to go create problems for myself. It's like I had some really big problems. And so being surrounded by these created problems gave me a sense of control about the things that I absolutely couldn't control. It wasn't just, and of course it is sometimes just like I have clients this way and this is no disrespect to them. Actually it's kind of a level of admiration of like their lives don't contain the type of challenge that I think we evolved to kind of need. This really like innate, and that's why they want to be in the mountains. They want to have this really visceral confrontation with nature in a way that feels, like we're hopefully not ever really getting close to risking their lives, but it feels much more so than anything in the rest of their lives. And that's okay too. Like it's all okay. I just have come through a place in life of working with people and being criticized by what people do and watching criticisms be lobbed. And it's like, we could just all be a lot more chill because you have no idea what people's background, reasoning, privileges are. And it's joyful, silly thing. We are literally walking uphill to a little spot, turning around and walking back down. And I like to imagine that there's some giant who like I'm his pet and not in a God sort of way, but just like, you have a dog. So, when Kat does some weird thing, you're like, why is she doing that weird thing again? And I like to imagine there's somebody who watches me and is like, oh, she's doing that thing where she walks back and forth in that exact same spot again. What is she doing there?
And looking from the outside,
that's all the depth.
It makes no sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. It's like not that path again. Why does she keep going up to just that point and then turning around and going back down? It's so weird.
One thing you said I think a lot about is like I think we're asked oftentimes by the media or to understand or to speak to what someone else's reason to climb Everest is or other mountains, and also not only to say what those reasons are, but then to kind of rank those reasons and what are the more valuable reasons versus less valuable reasons, who's taking more out of this experience versus someone else. And I really almost categorically like disagree with that process or framing because I really think it is hard to know. And it's very easy to be like, oh, they just want the story for the cocktail party. That's what people have been telling me since,
Who cares, right? Like, let them.
Exactly. But I also think maybe it's a good place to enter into talking about Enough, your book, because I think from the outside, and I even said this to Sam as we were prepping, like I remember in some ways our careers like paralleled, right? I think I went to Everest in '08 about the same time as you went to Everest for the first time. I failed without oxygen in 16 when you succeeded. So we've had some parallels. We've obviously been seeing each other in the mountains for a long time. We shared a huge sponsor. And from the outside, I remember thinking like, Melissa is the superstar of this sport, right? Like that's the clearest thing I could see. It just always looked good. The biggest sponsors, the most celebrities on the trips, the corporate speaking, the always looking put together, the successes, all these things. And you are this incredible example of like from the outside what this thing looked like, this Everest journey. And then you chose to write a book. Certainly it's not that no one knew of your challenges, right? You had friends and loved ones and partners who obviously knew you better than I did along the path. But like clearly there was so much more there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's been my career and the opportunities I've had have been such a double-edged sword. And I have so much gratitude on one hand. Like I often talk about a peer of mine who started guiding the same day for the same guide service that, at the beginning of our career. And then we got the same sponsor, and my career and my public facing career especially like ascended far, far beyond his. And I know that it's because I was an anomaly, because I was a conventionally attractive female that didn't fit the mold of what people expected for a high altitude mountaineer to be. But also, I gave a keynote speech one year for a club of the American Alpine Club, and the host who brought me on stage introduced me by saying, there's climbers and there's climbers, and Melissa's a climber, and come on up. And I remember feeling like, what does that mean? And I asked, and it's like, well, you're not really a climber. You're a celebrity climber. You just like play a climber on TV. And and that's like the nicest of it. That's the most PG of it, of the ways in which people didn't take me seriously and refused to, take me seriously. I think that's the big thing. And as I had this really audacious goal of trying to climb without oxygen that was also like wildly naive and was born out of my deep desire to prove that I belonged in this place where I really had this confusing relationship with belonging. Like, I'm here, I've done all this hard work, and then it's not enough. I'm not being taken seriously. People are making assumptions about why I'm getting opportunities or why I'm here. And I have to work so hard and fight so hard to have a space at the table. And then I'm inevitably hearing people talking behind, because in 2009 was my second trip on Everest, and it was my first time that I was going to attempt to climb without oxygen. And again, like wildly naive. I had no idea what I was getting into. I climbed one 8,000 meter peak, and that was Everest. Working as a guide, like I had no idea. I was 24 years old. But that was the beginning of me learning what it might take for me continuing to learn about the Himalayas and very high altitude, and me continuing to work really hard as a mountain guide and advance my skill set. And also me starting to hear the background chatter of people saying, she'll never be able to do this, and it's not going to happen. And even after it happened, I can't say a friend, but like a person who we are both friendly with said to me, why do you think people are going to believe that you actually climbed without oxygen? Because you tried all these times and you didn't succeed. And then the one time you succeeded, it was with your boyfriend and he was the only one there. Like that seems kind of unlikely. And I was at that point in my process and my journey of both interior self journey and like this relationship with achievement and this goal, I sort of didn't give a fuck. I was like, actually didn't do it so you would know if I did it or not, nor anybody. Like I actually did this to answer a question of my own, even though I did start out doing this for you. I'm no longer doing this for you. I'm really doing this for me. And it just feels like candy. It doesn't feel like the point of things. It just feels like the extra credit stuff. But yeah, it's been quite a journey. And so writing this book, I've always felt a little bit shameful, I guess, is a weird way to describe it. But I mean, I definitely have carried a lot of shame in my life, but I felt a little ashamed of that impression that you described, Adrian, of like, she has it all together. Because I did present this image of she who has it all together. And meanwhile, there was this backstory going on. And especially when my career was really ascendant and I was like on the stage, that was, truly one of the lowest points of my life that I almost didn't survive because things were going so terribly. And so it has felt imperative that if I share my story, I share the whole story. And the book Enough is, I dive into it all.
You just explained why the book I think is so courageous and also potentially so important, right? Because your journey is truly unique and your struggles are truly unique. But we all know that so many people out there, no matter how much they look like they have it together or don't look like they have it
Yeah.
together, are going through real struggles and have real moments of doubt and pain and these different things. But most of us don't perhaps have the courage to share that with everybody. And you did. So I guess maybe that's an interesting place to start. You know, I've heard the story or I've seen you mention the book was originally going to be called This Is Not a Book About Everest. We've obviously spent the first 20 minutes today talking about Everest, which is not surprising.
Yeah. And we'll probably say it again.
I love it a lot. Why was it so important to you to write a book that is not about Everest, even though that was the platform that gives you some of the storytelling, the excitement, and also the broad reach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I were to write the book that I had been asked to write in the past, it was a linear and predictable story of adventure, folly, and achievement. It's sort of like the corporate speaking that I do on some level. Like I really try to connect more intimately to my audiences, but often they really want this pretty linear story of like a why, some failure and challenge, and ultimately achievement. And then a blueprint for how to apply that to our lives. And unfortunately, like life as I know it is a tangled junk show most of the time. And very little about my life has been linear. And I just knew that if I was going to have one chance to introduce myself to the world with my own words and on my own terms. You know, I've been introduced by other people. I've been introduced by the media, by the sponsors, by the employers. I didn't ever get a chance to introduce myself. And even if I had, I was so afraid of being seen as my real true self, so afraid that I was unlovable, you know, and just really, I think we all have felt that level of insecurity before of if you like, you know, show all yourself and your flaws, you're going to be rejected. It's, you know, we all have been there, you know, whether you've just been on a date or not, you've been there, right? Where you're not like leading with the things in your closet. And it felt like if I'm going to do this, I really want to say, I want to add more context to the complexities, in my view, of being human. And I have been so lucky to see things in the world that most people will never see. You know, the most incredible moments in nature, the most stunning experiences, the best of humanity and like the absolute garbage worst of humanity. I've seen these moments and it's informed so much of who I am and who I know that I can be. And I think I've said about the book, the work of the book in the world is to sort of explain to people that you can be really imperfect and still be deserving of good things and still be deserving of having another story. Like it's both and in my case, you know, like I have had a really successful career in mountaineering and guiding. It's something I deeply, deeply love. It's not something I've checked off a list and I've moved on to doing something else, but it's also just part of who I am. You know, I have a whole other part of me as well. And I just wanted to sort of share that because I don't like the idea that we become sort of untouchable. We get up on this pedestal and people introduce themselves to me and say, oh, I love climbing, but like nothing like what you do. And I like internally just die when they say that because I'm like, there's nothing different about us, you know, like your uphill climb that's hard is the same as my uphill climb that's hard, no matter geographically where we are. We're in the same hard. We're having the same experience, you know, so you don't have to qualify that because you didn't climb Everest that you're not a real climber. And I don't have to qualify that I had to climb Everest without oxygen to be considered a real climber. Because guess what? There are still plenty of people who are like, she's a celebrity climber. She's not. The very next question out of people's mouths is like, oh, did you climb K2 though? And I'm like, it will never be enough. Like, and again, it's not about that. Like I'm being pulled towards the places that give me joy and the things I want to do in my life. And yeah.
Absolutely. And the title, I mean, you said enough a couple of times in that last conversation. And I'm interested, number one, in how it became the title. Like, was it something you were considering or was it someone else's choice? And then second of all, like you sort of perhaps already answered this, but what that word means to you today and maybe what it meant along your path. Because literally since I found out that was the title of your book, I have had dozens of conversations with friends and clients and corporate speaking group
Mhm.
just last week. Like, the word is so powerful, and it's not a word I've ever thought of before.
Well, you can just enjoy the world I'm in, where it's a word that if you look at for more than a minute, it's definitely one of those words that becomes not a word really quickly because of how many vowels and stuff are in it. And so I have to be careful with enough. But yeah, I mean, the book was called, when I sent the book to my agent, it was in a file called This Is Not a Book About Everest, because the first thing I felt like I wanted people to know is that it wasn't a book about Everest. And I didn't want them to think this is going to be, again, that like linear story of achievement and blah, blah, blah. It's a different book. And it just stuck. And my editor really loved it. And for the whole process of working with him over the course of 3 years, he was like, I'm 90% sure this is the title of the book. Like, this is not a book about Everest. It's so good. We designed a cover and everything. It went up on all the markets, like on Amazon, everything, as This Is Not a Book About Everest.
Wow.
And then we got late in the process, and because I was working with a big publisher, so I was working with Crown and Penguin Random House, and so you find out really quickly. I don't know, Adrian, the last time you were like just a straight up employee of somebody, but that's kind of what working with a publisher is like. You're an employee and you lose all your autonomy of being a business owner, and it's very weird.
I think
So
I'd be
you have
very
to
bad
like
at that.
I suck at it. They hate me. They're like, can you send us travel invoices? I'm like, excuse me. Like,
right.
it's so
Receipts?
hard.
What?
Yeah. I'm like, can I just book my own travel, please? So I'm adjusting to that. But they said they really wanted a subtitle because they wanted to answer the question of like, if it's not a book about Everest, what is it a book about? And I'm like, it's a book that's not about Everest, and you then read the book to find out what it's about actually. Like, that's the trick. We don't want to give away too much. And I was really uncomfortable with how mouthy This Is Not a Book About Everest is to say. And I'd really always wanted it to have a one-word title, but I had never found that word. That word had never emerged to me. I tried all sorts of different words on and like felt them. I was like, nope, that's not it. And so we were in this fight about, it was going to be called like, This Is Not a Book About Everest, Climbing Everest and Finding My True Self, or some crazy long title. And I was like, hard no, can't do that.
Yep.
And I just sent him a message back and I was like, if you're going to demand a subtitle, let's just call the book Enough and I'll concede on the subtitle. And my editor came back and he said, why did we not say enough before? Like, that is the book's title. He's like, it's at the end of the first paragraph of the first chapter. It's this recurrent theme. It like is so beautiful. And I was like, honestly, I have no idea. It just came to me. and then when I started going through the book, I'm like, it is one of the most common themes in the book. And for me, I've given a lot of thought. It's about, I've given a lot of thought about myself, obviously, in the writing of this book and just in my life. But I really have had this strong sense of not being enough. And it comes from sort of an origin wound that then I made more complicated myself as I grew. And I did things and I set myself into circumstances which constantly made me question my own enoughness. And I think anybody who is an achiever or who has participated in achievement activities or sports, coloring or running, whatever it is, you might know that feeling of like you are striving for validation. Like our highest best self doesn't care about exterior validation, but we are not all our highest best self. We are all, deeply wanting approval. And when you have this like deep worth wound, it's really hard to you can't achieve your way into knowing your enoughness. And my journey and the healing process that I went on, which, again, like almost caused me to lose my life before I got to that place, it became about really answering this innate enoughness and knowing that therefore I can't get to any summit that's going to make me feel enough. I can't achieve my way anywhere because I already am. And that feeling is incredibly relieving. It's just incredibly relieving to just know that this idea of deservingness is for us all. Like, you don't have to do anything to be deserving. And so that's the baseline of it, but it really means so much to me. And I said this, and recently in another interview, but the word is so beautiful because it means so many things and it can really mean anything. And for me, it really does embody this idea of, I have done enough. Like, I don't have to do more to be a climber's climber or to be a whatever in any atmosphere that I'm in. And I've had enough. Like, I've dealt with some really horrible things that I have upheld and continued to just deal with. And I'm done doing that. I've had truly enough. And that innateness of like, I am enough. And all of us have those three embodiments. currently, I think, especially in this place in life we all are.
Yes. I was going to start diving in and like talking about very specific moments in the book, and we'll hit on a few, but I think it is just really important. Like the book as a whole is what's so powerful. Maybe that's hopefully true with most great books. But so first of all, the book has just recently come out. We obviously had advanced copies, but just to our listeners, as we're like dropping in and dropping out and talking about things, like go get the book, read the book, then maybe re-listen to this episode. I hope people will. So without, going into too many stories or giving away too much, like you mentioned, you had this like initial, like obviously traumas that started you on this path. Can you give us just that, like, how do you concisely sort of begin this story that set you on this path?
Yeah. I mean, I want to start first by saying that, we'll start in the middle by saying no matter what happened to me or to you or any of us, we still have free will, right? Like we go forward in our life and we make choices. And I took my set of initial circumstances and you could argue made some good choices and like inarguably made some really bad choices as well. And that was not because of something that happened to me. That was me choosing to react in a way. And I take full responsibility for that. The book contains a lot of me sharing some of those moments of regret of my life. And I really want to be clear, like sometimes I use humor to deflect from my discomfort, as many of us do. And I don't think any of it's funny. Like I don't treat it with, I treat it with the care and there's nothing you can say about me that I haven't like deeply reflected on myself in so many ways about kind of the ickier stuff. But yeah, I grew up in a family, in a really like economically modest family. And I had a really challenging relationship with my mother from birth. And my parents were married and together. And I had a sister who was a year older. And we grew up on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. My dad worked for the tribe. And the conflict with my mom really created that initial sense of like, do I belong? And I felt like I didn't. I felt like everything was very conditional upon, and it was, my sister is like this incredible human who was really a super perfectionist. And we had a 6th grade teacher that called her Little Miss Perfect. And when I got to 6th grade, he called me Little Almost Miss Perfect. And that was just like really a perfect embodiment of my, I know. But also I was like, oh, so true. Like, she was just like everything. And I just like could never, it was all very conditional, like all of the accolades or if I got love depended on if I did X, Y, and Z, and not in a traditional way. Like my parents did not want my sister and I to go to college. They did not want us to do like your traditional steps of, success of your children that I think you hear about so often. It was way
sort of
more
anti-establishment, right?
Very anti-establishment hippies. Yeah. Some pot smoking hippies. And, but that led to sort of a weird existence for me because, weed was illegal at that time. And I ended up then as right at the precipice of my teen years in a predatory relationship with a teacher who was a police officer who ultimately convinced me to have my parents arrested and split my family up. I went to a foster home, and it's not just as tough as that. It's that I went to a foster home and my parents, were arrested, and really our whole family exploded. And it was my view at that time because of me, because of a choice I made. And I had this really confusing relationship with power and women because of my mom. And then I now, as I was becoming a young woman, developed a really confusing relationship with men and power because of this predatory adult. And ultimately, my family moved from Colorado to Montana in the wake of this. And I really became exiled from them and just existed until I could escape, essentially, and get out of high school. And I moved out of my parents' house before I turned 18, really as a means of survival, because things were really, really difficult for me during that time. And then I found the mountains, and it gave me a sense of really this like wonderful spaciousness that I craved, and this deep, deep independence that, now that I have kids, I believe that kids are kind of who they are innately on their personality in some ways. Like I'm certain that I was just born as a really independent character who was gonna just like go jump over the fence no matter what happened in my life. And so the mountains were like that exactly. I could go jump over the fence and just kind of keep going, and I could be in solitude, and I could challenge myself, and I could feel a sense of worth, in the beginning, where I started to feel this sense of like, I did this and it's irrefutable. Like, I did it. I got to this little place. And then I started to crave to have some power of my own, so that's what actually drew me to mountain guiding. And I wish I could say that it was, such a beautiful, simple, straightforward story of like, I just love the mountains and I loved teaching people. And those two things are very true. But I also, my ego and my like intent need to be in control pushed me into not wanting to just experience the mountains as an athlete, because I didn't see athletes getting the same respect as I saw guides getting. And so I wanted to be a capital G guide. I wanted to be the person that people look to. And I was doing this in other areas of my life too, right? So I started working in emergency medicine, and I couldn't just be like somebody who was trained in first aid. I had to go like all the way up the ranks and get to the highest level of pre-hospital emergency care that I could, so that I could be the one in power. And I now can look back and recognize like I probably had an unhealthy need to like have that control and power and try to like have that respect. And that's what was pushing me forward. But I also was really enjoying it. And I was also learning so much. And I was, I grew up in a family without a lot of money or resources, and travel was not on the radar of my future. And so when I started getting to fly to other countries to go walk up their hills, like I thought, what more could I want in this life? Like, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm going to do it forever. I'm getting people respect me. They need me. And I'm getting paid to go travel around the world and see these amazing big places. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey. And I weave that together in the beginning of the book of some of that backstory of my childhood and how it pushed me into the mountains, and sort of that strange mother figure that I got from the mountains that felt both loving and accepting, and also fierce and punishing in some ways, and how I felt really comfortable in areas where things felt uncertain.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference. You entered the mountaineering, I'd say, community industry in, I guess that makes it like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It comes across in your book, and, I've certainly seen it as a guide and athlete and eventually business owner. Like, it was a difficult time to get in as a woman, right? And you had real challenges there and kind of went maybe one of the toughest routes, right? Tryouts at RMI. Like, it's just famous for kind of the game that it is, as well, as well as a great entry point.
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about RMI was that it introduced me to a fraternity structure, which I had never had. Like, I went through my entire high school feeling really isolated, alone, with no sense of learningness from sport or community. And so that was my first experience with experienced people bringing their experience back and teaching less experienced people and letting them learn together. And I loved that. It was so wonderful because it didn't rely on like ridiculing my failures to see if I could survive, but also it definitely relied on like ridiculing my failures in front of people to, see if I was mentally tough enough to be there or whatever. And, I talk about the guide tryouts experience, my guide tryouts experience, which, it's evolved hugely since that era of 2005. But, yeah, it was a wild experience. And I also, to be a woman there, like, was just such a weird thing to be, because again, you were both like an anomaly. And if you could be, correctly packaged, then you could go pretty further than your male peer of equal skill set. And so that felt unfair to him, right? Where it's like, right, well, she's just getting this job because of X, Y, and Z. But then you also had to constantly do this delicate dance, and for me, I have said that I learned really quickly that my survival depended on either telling the joke or being the joke. And so I have a arsenal of like the dirtiest, nastiest jokes you've ever heard. And I would like lead an expedition by like saying one early on, so that all the guys on the trip would know, like, okay, she's cool. Like, she's safe. We can be ourselves around her. We don't have to be like all on our best behavior and scared of sexual harassment suits. But then, you open yourself up to some truly crazy
Sexual
shit.
harassment.
Yeah. Yeah, some sexual harassment. Yeah. But I talk about it in the book. Like, I was simultaneously like judging and I saw this when I was like at the crag too, rock climbing. Any girl who was there climbing with her boyfriend, I internally was like, "Ugh, she's not a real climber. Like, she's climbing with her boyfriend," while I was there climbing with my boyfriend, And like, I didn't want to be, though. I wanted what he had. And I talk about like how I had, again, like a really confusing understanding and stumbled through my personal relationships and often, sadly, wanting what my partner had more than I wanted to be in a relationship with them, which is so toxic and unhealthy and so unkind and unfair to those partners. But it was, I was just holding on by my fingernails in this industry, trying to move forward because I could get in the room, but like that door slamming its in your face is quick and sudden and like very tenderly triggered as a young, inexperienced woman in the industry. Like, you can be out the door so quickly. And so it was a very delicate balance for me to try to figure out how to not just be there, but stay and try to like, navigate this idea of my competence and my perceived value. And I really struggled to figure out how to do that. And, I talk about my relationship with Peter Whitaker, who is the owner of RMI and a character in the book. And I think, people in the outdoor industry who know Peter or know of Peter, who have read the book, are like, whoa, is he cool with everything you wrote in the book? And I have to say, like, it's been one of the most incredible experiences because I did sit down with him before I gave him the book and then talked to him after. And he really sort of did the thing that I would be my dream scenario of somebody doing, which was to say, I'm really sorry about this situation. I had no idea that that was going on. And like, I hear that this was your experience and I'm sorry that I played a part in that. And it just meant so much to me, because it's like, because there's other people who are named in the book, and we'll just leave it at that. You have to get the book to read the names, who are like definitely never going to talk to me again. And they're taking a totally different way. And it's not a burn book by any means. I'm not like airing out anyone's secrets. So I'm just giving my perspective of what it was like to be me. And I acknowledge that that's an incomplete perspective. It's not a record of fact. It's what I experienced. But yeah, there's other men who I interacted with in really conflicting ways who have just said nothing, have the book, got the book, and have never said anything to me again about it. And I take that to know what that means. And that's fine.
It is what it is. They're on their journey too, right? Like exactly what you said. You're on your journey, and these were your experiences. Certainly, they were part of that, and making mistakes or doing the things they did. At the same time, that is one small part of their whole story as well, right?
Yeah.
It would be really nice if more people were able to have the self-awareness and the willingness to put the energy and time in that you are by addressing some of these.
Well, and I will just say, Adrian, something really interesting that I've thought about a little bit that is interesting now. So now that I know you much better than I did when we were in our early Everest days, like that 2008, 9, 10, 11, like we're seeing each other every year. We're on 12, different tracks. 13, we're 14. Both, 13, 14, 15, 16, the whole time. I'm just going for a 9-year run there. But we would have these conversations sometimes. And at that time, how I identified you was as somebody who was like IFMGA or nothing. And we had some like lively and spirited debates. And now that I understand like the enjoyment that you get from just being kind of an adversarial questioner of things, and I mean that as a compliment, I can, and also now that I'm like a more healed version of myself, I can handle it a little more and just understand like, hey, it is good to have people take strong positions and challenge your position because it does make us grow. It does make us think really completely about our position. But the reason why that was extremely triggering for me, and we would like, I don't know if you feel like we would butt heads about it, but
for sure.
I'm sure you heard the things I would say behind your back about like, Adrian and the IFMGA, because the reason it really triggered me was because it was something that was truly not available to me. And I can say that from, and now looking back, right? Like as a young 21-year-old woman starting guiding in 2005, from no economic support, it was not available to me in any realistic way. And it felt like such an assault on like my belonging again. And that's not, of course, you had a whole different complex reasoning, and the way you were thinking about it was totally
Absolutely.
true for your experience. But then for me, I was like, this is just another gate that's going to keep me out forever. And I will never be able to walk through this gate. And of course, like we're seeing very slow shifts to how those gates can be, permeable, but it's still really, really hard if you don't come from a traditional background to be able to go through those gates. And I this is an apology, I guess, or just an acknowledgement that like there's perspective now. And I'm like, and I love our debates now.
Absolutely. No, perspective is helpful. Also, I think we all are growing, right? Maybe one day I'll have a book to tell my story, but empathy has not necessarily been my strong suit, as many people know. And so that makes it easier to argue things as a black or white. And I certainly do have plenty of experience doing that. But it is funny.
It holds a place.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. But it's funny you bring it up because Sam and I, as we were planning for this interview, we were like, it is one of the things we talk about quite a bit on this podcast is mountain guiding and IFMGA certification and things like that. And we had guests on the podcast like Garrett Madison, who's not an IFMGA guide, who I have a huge amount of respect for. And it's something I still find interesting to discuss, and yet now have a lot more understanding of like the importance of different pathways to get to maybe the same place, or at least the same profession. This is only one small piece.
Yeah. And I think if everybody is striving continuously to be the best they can be, sometimes that is through traditional education routes. Sometimes that is through these like really systematic checkpoints that ensure that there is some universal language that we all can speak, and that's really, really helpful. It's just, there's also barriers, and it's like, it's tough when it's like this, it's universal language that everybody can speak, but only if your tongue does this one specific thing, can you even try to speak it? And you can't change that about yourself because it's just how you were born. And it's like, okay, well, whatever, this is all we're doing.
And Sam's on the path right now, and we talk plenty about the frustrations and challenges as well as the potential of it. How's it going, Sam?
It's tough. It's, I mean, it's interesting to think about. And I think, it's important to acknowledge, Melissa, that you started your career with an operation that had a lot of structure around training. And I can't speak for all the operations, but I think the industry is kind of moving away from that because of the AMGA and the IFMGA. And there is more reliance on not a governing body, but an institution that is doing that training rather than the individual businesses. And so the dynamic is definitely shifting, but it's an expensive and time-consuming process that the people that do it in 3 years, it shocks me because I'm on the let's maybe try for 20-year path, because there are barriers for everyone, and it's a tough process.
I mean, we all have for sure you guys can appreciate the jokes of with your PIN, you should also get the application to be a firefighter, because that in 2 years, that's what you're going to be doing after you've just completed this intense and laborious process to achieve the highest level of validation and certification in your career path. And I understand the frustrations of, somebody who has not put in that investment, having a lucrative career doing the thing that you're trying to, reach that height. And so it's very understandable. And it's just interesting. I think I can only be myself. And so I can only know what my own path has been like in guiding. And, I talk about often how when I was on Everest in 2008, I really was super curious about how come there weren't any other women who were regularly working on Everest. Lydia Brady was actually there that season, and I believe that was her second time commercially working there. And I was really curious about it just generally. And, I was told when I asked, why aren't there women who are Dave Hawning it and just doing 16 trips in a row? And I was told generally women are smarter than that. And it was, everybody laughs, and it's okay. And then I thought about it, and I'm I think that is a joke meant to keep me out, I think that is just, it's said as a lightness of you're too smart for that, sweetie. And it's okay, well, actually I'm not, and I'm going to show back up, and I'm going to fight so hard to come back here and work. And I had to fight so hard. I know from the exterior, people probably thought like, oh, Melissa's going back to Everest, working for sponsors again, easy, yellow brick road of gold, like
Right.
enjoy your life. Meanwhile, I'm like fighting for my life. I'm like trying to negotiate into my athlete contract a guaranteed trip to Everest, just covering my permits, or another 8,000 meter peak, because I know that if I don't have this guarantee, it's so much less likely that I'm going to be able to get back there. And I'm periodically guiding clients, but nobody really is noticing that there. They're like, and even like Everest Inc., Will talks about like that you're the first female guide. I'm like, hello, bro. Like I was there that year, and it's incorrect. It's like that just general erasure. And so I've thought a lot more about it. And I think for women, especially, women who are participating in leisure activities, we're going to say, in what conventionally society has deemed their most productive years. And by productive, I mean their ability to have children and raise children. We really don't welcome women into spaces. We don't do it in like high levels of corporate success. We don't do it in high levels of risk activities or sport. And we judge women really harshly who do participate in those activities in their most like quote unquote productive years of their life, in which they're expected to be birthing and raising children. And so that was the answer, right? Of why aren't women guiding here repeatedly? It's because we generally as a global society see women's use as being the raisers of family and the bearers of family, and men aren't upheld in that same way. And I was watching through my years working on Everest when I didn't have a family, in 2010, Dave Morton and I went to the summit while his wife was like days away from having his son. And there's just no reality where there's a reciprocal
There's no
experience
equality.
for a female.
Yeah.
There's just it's never going to be the same. And so it's interesting because, and maybe Emily's experienced this in her sport. I think she's done a really good job. And I think like the conversation is moving. I think her sport's like a little bit different for it, but there is this like pretty intense erasure that happens then as a woman when you participate in activities like this. And I think like we see it on the levels of like Congress and, women not being able to vote remotely if they have families, or paternity, same issue. But people like to imagine that women like disappear into their hidey hole where they like raise their children until they're able to come back out and re-enter as productive members of society as grandmothers or something. And it's like, it's wild. It's really wild because it's changed my life and guiding career, of course, having kids, but necessarily by my choice. Like it's been really fascinating to watch how clients just assume that I'm not working anymore. And then my relationship with Everest, we started out talking about it. Like I haven't been back working on Everest since 2016 when I climbed without oxygen. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that like my personal goals on Everest were complete, and it coincided with a couple of things happening. One of that was that I had my first daughter in 2018, and I knew I didn't want to be gone for really extended periods of time when she was really little. And then simultaneously, some like major things in the industry started happening. And right when I felt like, okay, I think I'm ready to go back and work on Everest, things had shifted so massively through 2020 and into today that I feel like the way that I interact with Everest is best currently done from the role that I interact with it through the Juniper Fund and working with the Khumbu Climbing Center, and not actually guiding on the mountain. I don't think that that's what I want to be doing right now. I don't think that's the best use of my experience and skills, even though I'm guiding elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, that was something I definitely wanted to hear more about, was like what your relationship today to Everest is. Is it something that you can imagine going back to in the right scenario, the right people, things like that? Like, do you still have a lot of love for the place?
When we were first on Everest in 2008, Adrian, I was looking around at all of the foreign guides, and I was calculating like their median age, and I'm like, they're all like 60. And so I could take 15 years off of guiding on Everest and go back, and I'll still be 20 years younger than everyone else. And I mean, that's an exaggeration by some measure, but it really just was like this older guard of dudes where I was like, I don't have to I'm 23. When I started guiding on Everest, which is crazy.
It is crazy.
Also, bless the clients that tied into sweet little 5'3", 23-year-old Melissa. You had so much faith, and I appreciate you greatly. But yeah, I don't think it's a no. I can't say it's not absolute, like I'm done on Everest. I'll never go back. I'm personally done with my personal goals on Everest. But I do think that like there's absolutely a realm where I would return working. And I think I've always said one of the biggest bummers is when people gain a lot of institutional knowledge about a place and a thing and then leave, because you take with you all of that potential progress of something changing. And so while I'm on the outside sort of observing some major industry shifts that have happened with the commercial guiding, specifically in Nepal, I'm getting a chance to like still have a voice at that table. And, if it became right for me to work there, then I would. I work with a number of clients that like that's in their goal set and it's in the realm of possibility. And I would still do what I have always only done, which is guide one-on-one private trips. That's sort of how my relationship to guiding on Everest feels correct and appropriate.
Yep. It's awesome. I mean, the partnership that forms in that is so powerful, especially like I feel like what you're known for is working with people through almost like mentorship over years and then achieving these big goals. And that's just a really powerful way to do these things.
Yeah. And I don't mind if somebody just has like a checklist of summits that they want to climb and that's what they're doing. But I find that they then usually don't like me because that's not my methodology necessarily. And so it's not that I judge them doing that. It's mostly that, I mean, I do. I'm trying to say I don't, but I do. I definitely judge that. But I'm like, you do you. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I do think that gaining a skill set, and we've talked about this, it's one of these ideas. And I understand both sides of it. Like I understand why the rapid ascent program has a space and a place for so many people that couldn't have this experience otherwise because of time limitations.
Totally.
And I also think that like it's so amazing to go on a long expedition. Like it's one of the most cleansing things you can do for your brain and your body and your life. It's just this like mega reset button. And it can be that if it's a 3-week reset button, but we can never have back. I was just trying to explain to my husband, Tyler, how my first year on Everest, there was not only like very, very difficult internet, expensive, that you basically could just download a weather forecast and that is it. Like no emails, nothing. There was also no phones in the Khumbu. Like there wasn't cell service. There was zero interaction. And we got a helicopter, very few helicopters also came into base camp. And a helicopter came on a rescue and our operator had put a box of newspapers and magazines in it for us from the past month. And that was like
absolutely
how we were interacting with the outside world and just how not that way it is now. And I'm of course like that crotchety old person that's like, kids these days will never know.
Totally.
But I'm like, that was
right
so
there with
beautiful. Yeah, there was something so good. And when I guide treks now or like trekking peaks in the Khumbu, I do this thing with my clients where we make family choices around technology. So if one person is going to get internet in the group, like everybody needs to get internet, because it's really terrible to watch the like FOMO of the person who decided they didn't want to have connectivity and the other person be like, oh my God, this news thing, it's terrible. And I try to like gently suggest like, let's just do a day. Like if there's an emergency, like I've got my phone, I'll get contacted, like you'll know, I've been through it all here. And so, yeah, it's nice to have that little reset and cleanse, but it'll never be like that again.
No, it is really hard to get those cleanses and resets. I love that memory. Like I remember on a helicopter getting a Fire and Ice pizza and an Economist magazine, and like my life was full. Like I had just like hit the jackpot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Dave Morton and we used to bring New Yorkers and we would rip them in half on our various rotations and then switch halfway through because we that was your media intake when you were in the tent. I was stuck at Camp 1 on Makalu by myself for 3 days. And this is one of the things that didn't make it into the book is this whole chapter about the Makalu experience. But it was just Dave Morton and I climbing together, climbing without oxygen. And he needed to acclimatize a little bit differently than I did. I needed to stay up high for a little extra time. And so I was just by myself in a first light. And the storm came that we, of course, didn't have forecasted because we had zero connectivity. Yeah. And I was just stuck, the only person above that very loaded slope. And everybody at base camp just being like, we got to wait for that to actually avalanche. And I'm just digging myself out, and I had nothing. I had no form of entertainment, and I had my snacks and Dave's snacks, and I started reading every single ingredient and then doing like math equations of like how many E's are on the back of this, like, 3 days just stuck by yourself inside a tent, shoveling and reading snack wrappers. So it's a good time.
It's a form of meditation.
Kids these days, they'll never know.
Well, before we leave the book, like the meat of the book for me was like, in these years, you've built up how you've gotten to this point, and you're in these years where you're attempting without oxygen. And I think you attempted in some form 4 years without supplemental oxygen on Everest. No American woman had summited without oxygen and gotten back down alive, which is a whole nother podcast we could talk about. But and you failed a number of times. And there are a lot of external reasons for that. And ultimately,
and internal reasons.
And internal reasons. Yeah. Which is important to acknowledge. It's easy for me to be like, but don't worry, that was because of weather this or that. But no.
No, it was just me. That was the problem.
So that's the meat. Can you speak just a little bit to like what changed? What did you change between those failures and 2016 when you succeeded?
Yeah, I mean, everything honestly changed for me. So I had, simultaneous to my Everest career, my guiding, the sort of like media role that I had in sponsorships, I had started trying to like root myself into this other life. I got married, I had a house, and I was living in Sun Valley, Idaho. And I was doing the things that I thought would make me feel like enough. And I was checking all the boxes of like, I am successful. I have a golden retriever. I have a professional athlete husband. I, have all these things. And unfortunately, and really fortunately, I was also having to confront the fact that there was no way that any of that was going to hold any true meaning for me. And as I checked these other boxes in my life that I thought would then make me feel like I was enough and feel good, and it didn't occur, I was having to confront this idea that, it wasn't so obvious. It's very clear to me now, but I couldn't have said this then. But I did have this idea in my head that like, if I can climb Everest without oxygen, I will then have everything. Nobody will be able to say a single thing about my deservingness. Nobody will ever be able to question my competence, my skill set. I also was like really unsure if I could do it, because I am not athletically elite. I don't have like a crazy high VO2 max. I don't have any sort of like special thing. I'm very, very average in that way, but I'm incredibly persistent. And so I was really starting to have to confront that. And then I was participating in some pretty like self-destructive behaviors in my own life. And I talk about it in the book. And I just reached this really dark, dark place where I realized, my marriage had really fallen apart. I had really not set it on a good foundation. And then it continued to be a struggle for me. And I had isolated myself from friendships in both my community and my work and my peers. I had sort of created like a very toxicness around me. I think that's maybe like when we started working together a little bit with our sponsor. And, I wasn't like a well-liked person by my people in my community because I was really struggling internally with some really dark, dark stuff. And I ultimately like reached a point where, I was really unsure what the point of anything was, because I'd sort of like realized that all of this accolades chasing and all this achievement chasing was so empty. And because, I'd had these deeper interior wounds that were so undealt with, I had a really irrational response to finding out that achievement didn't make me feel enough. A rational response is like to self-reflect and think about how to heal that internal wound. But my reaction instead was that like, I'm going to commit suicide. And I had to really face that intention. And it wasn't the first time in my life. And I talk about that in the book, that I'd, gotten really close to ending my life, and that feeling of like really, real depression. If you've experienced that, it's something very different from being sad. It's just very different. And in that era, something really wild happened where I went to Tibet. Again, it's in the book. Paintings start talking. It's weird. But really what happened was I did start to like not run away from myself. And I'd spent so long running away and trying to think that I could prove my worth instead of just understanding innately that I had worth. And so prior to 2016, so this was in 2015, I began that journey of like really interior, not reflection, because I had been reflecting for a really long time, but like removal of the self-hate that I'd been carrying, removal of the shame, and like starting to practice some really intense self-love and forgiveness for things that both were outside of my control and then the things that were in my control. And in that process, I sort of also questioned, like, should I go back to Everest? Do I still feel motivated? Because I have this new clarity that achieving this thing will not make me deserving and will not fix anything. There's still going to be
So then
people.
do you still want to do it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Do I still want to do it? And like, shockingly, I did. And I really had to dig into why. Why do I want to do this? Because I can tell you with great certainty, I wanted to prove that I was enough, right? And so that's why I started out doing this. And since I no longer felt so attached to that, like, which unfortunately wasn't just like a flip switch, it's an undoing process of feeling unattached to validation in the same way that I had lived so much of my life. But I really just recognized that I was curious. I was really curious about what my own limits were given the chance. And I luckily had Uli Steck as a mentor and a really close friend. We'd experienced something very crazy for him on Everest in 2013 with the fight, and it had bonded us. And he really had just been this like background voice of encouragement to me. And he told me, like, if you don't try to do this, it'll never go away. Like, you'll always question. And he was right, for sure. And he gave me some like pretty helpful, just practical advice, because that's who he was. It's like a very practical person. And I took his practical advice and combined it with my new sense of not needing to prove something. And I went on this journey of really deep curiosity, of just like, what's possible for me, and tried to kind of turn down all the noise that I've been carrying with me for so long. And, we experienced that in 2016. I was like avoidant of you guys while you were there, because I was really afraid of re-entering that cycle of needing your validation and needing you to think that I was a real climber, that I could do this, and me looking at you and looking for your approval that I was going to be able to do this or not. And like, I was actively working on untethering myself from that. And so it just ended up coming together. And I don't know, I think it's in many ways this is probably the lack of oxygen at altitude without supplemental oxygen, but it just felt totally like this thing that was meant to be. Like, I felt like I was stronger on summit day than I had ever been in my life, which was wild and crazy. I mean, of course, I was moving like slower than I'd ever gone in my entire life as well. Very uninteresting. But everything was just so full of possibility. And I had this like beautiful sense of, I'd really wanted to do this totally alone by myself to prove that I could do this alone. And I had this really incredibly beautiful sense that I was like with everybody in my life on that summit. Like the people who, even like my challenging relationship with my mother, like that had brought me here. Like these things that were really wonderful from my childhood, that had brought me here. The loss of friends, like that was so painful, that brought me here. And then these like incredible mentors and people that I believed in had brought me here too. And yeah, it just felt like it was one of those like really ultra perfect, super long days. And it kind of all just came together. And luckily, it was exactly what I hoped it would be, which was just extra credit. Like the thing that I got to keep in my life was this knowingness that if I hadn't done it, that would have been fine too. And as a fun karmic lesson to me for that, I've been working with my sponsor for a long time and put a lot of investment towards this goal. And then when I achieved the goal, it was right alongside this like really wildly popular Snapchat Everest climb that everybody wanted to talk about instead of my no oxygen climb. And so it was a really fun experience for me to like see if what I said was true about not needing the validation and the accolades was actually true, because it was I think you guys like flew back and went directly to like Good Morning America, and I went and like did a like in-print interview with Glamour magazine. So that was a different ride we were both on, and that was really fun and very humbling. And
And who's the climber's climber now?
Yeah, exactly. Snapchat.
Yeah, I know. Well, now it's just good to know we can like share some of the same critiques now.
Like Snoop Dogg tweeting like, "Wow, he failed and turned around. How cool is that?" You're like, okay.
Not cool. Yeah, I know. I say this all the time when people say like, I have so much more respect for people that turn around. I'm like, I mean, I've
Bullshit.
done both, and I know that you don't. Like, I know we wish that that was true, but like, it's just not
Exactly.
true. Like, we learn so much from that, but like the public doesn't really celebrate our near successes again at this incredibly silly little activity of coloring. It's like, we're not
Absolutely.
clapping for an unfinished coloring project.
Yeah. But people still feel the need to say the platitudes and, okay,
No.
well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the way you described that, there was a real spirituality to the experience, it sounds like. And is that something that's remained a part of your life, that kind of like connection that you felt? Is that something that you've always had, or did that really come from this place, from this climb?
Yeah, I mean, it's been something I've always had. I talk about it in the book, specifically on Everest. Like, I had some really strange experiences in sort of like dream-like states where really big things were actually happening, and I was sort of like finding out about it before I could possibly know that it was happening. And I've always had like that sort of I think of it as like a thin connection with whatever is beyond, in many ways. And I could feel it when I was working on the ambulance, and I would come into a space where somebody was alive but definitely going to die, and I would have no necessarily reason to know that, but it was with great certainty that I was like, there's no person here anymore. And so being on Everest, I think, has been one of those experiences where, like, I personally think like it gets even thinner, right? Like, your experience with like whatever is beyond and whatever is here, like the space between is much more narrow, and you get to feel that. And so it's something I've always felt, and it's something that I feel like there's this really beautiful idea of like perfectly right timing. And that's kind of like the divinity of life. Like, you are exactly where you're meant to be, for good, for bad. And of course you have free will, so you can like yank yourself out of any situation. But that has been something that I've been able to like definitely carry with me. And I have these really like wonderful moments of like being on that climb and just really knowing like, I know I'm in the right place right now. Like, I just truly know I am.
Yeah.
So, Melissa, fast forwarding to today, before we wrap this up, you live in Washington with your husband, Tyler, and 2 kids. You and Tyler both work as a guide. And I'm just curious because Adrian and I both have partners that are kind of in similar spaces to us. We both have kids. How does that dynamic work, working as a guide with a partner who also works as a guide and raising 2 kids?
So we do something that was birthed in COVID times, which has persisted, and we apply it to our lives now. And the really big idea is that we have a parenting season and a work season for each of us. And it doesn't mean that you won't work in your parenting season. It just means that you who are in the work season get priority on your schedule. So, because Tyler and I have schedule conflicts in our season sometimes. Like, he's primarily a human powered uphill ski guide, and so his work is through the winter into the spring, but then you look at like South America and it can easily be in the fall. So in his parenting season, if something comes up for him with work, it's sort of like on him to figure out the puzzle of childcare if I'm also working. And maybe it means that like I'm not working and I can take over. And then same for me. Like, when right now he's deep in his Alaska season, he runs a operation in the Wrangles. It's a ski plane fly-in lodge, and it's like ski plane assisted heli-touring, or not heli-touring, but yeah, touring. It's really cool.
4-person Cubs, right? Like,
yeah,
so
it's super Cubs.
unusual.
Yeah. I know, it's like really one of the most unique things, and nobody understands how exceptional it is. And the only way I can ever tell people is that he's been running this program for, I don't know, maybe like 9 years, almost 10 years now. And almost every week they still ski a first descent. That's how big this place is and how much terrain there is, like, for every single group. It's incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, Michelle Parker is up there this week right now, having a good time.
Michelle,
yeah.
I'm desperate to check it out.
Yeah, you gotta come up. It's so cool. But so when he's gone, like, that's my parenting season. And so we try to matrix it together and make sure that we each get a healthy dose of work. And then what I find for us with our family is like, we really get a healthy dose of connected time with our kids individually. And then we try to like pad some ends that are the whole family together. And it's never perfect. Like, inevitably, when I'm deep in the middle of my parenting season, I'm like, I just want freedom. I just want to be able to like make a decision without having to like do 17 steps. And then he'll feel that way in his. But in the big picture, when I look at it, it's like, it works, and we are traveling mountain guide parents, and we love our family, we love our work, and we've figured out this like bizarre Tetris game. And we honestly like travel quite a lot for work with our kids. And so anytime it's reasonable, we try to bring them with us to experience the world and experience these places. And it doesn't always work. It's going to, of course, be harder as they get older. Maybe it'll be easier. I don't know. But it's been, this little matrix for us, and it works out pretty well. And I recommend, even if you're not like a traveling parent, doing this like primary parent season. You could probably rotate it like 2 weeks out of each month, just so that every parent feels a sense of individualism still within the concept of being a family. And for me, it makes my family time feel much more important and much richer, because I still get a sense of like getting to be an individual and get to focus on my stuff too. And then I can like lean back in and appreciate the family side even more.
I think it's great. It's inspiring to watch from the outside that, 2 working guides is not always, with a family, is not always something that you see. So it's cool to see. And my wife and I have a similar, situation. I'm on primary parent duty right now.
You're in parenting season right now. You're scheduling podcasts, and it's like these are not the priority right now.
No.
But it's cool too. I mean, I think, it's one of the great things about parenting is sharing what you're experiencing with other people. And when your partner is out traveling, working, having the opportunity to share something about your kid with the person that cares most is pretty special and fun and unique. And so there's some real, cool things that have come out of it for sure.
Yeah, just the way you connect, I think, is so amazing. And, we are in an era, we're kind of just getting maybe out of it, I don't know, of how judgmental the world is to me as a mother, traveling and guiding with really little kids. Like as my kids get older, that somehow becomes more acceptable for people through their lens. And I don't know. I can't answer the question of like what the right thing to do is, but I just think that, we chose to have a family knowing who we are and like how we live in the world. And I am uniquely not naive to what the loss of a parent looks like in a family. The work we do with the Juniper Fund is dealing with the loss of a family member and sitting with those families. And we support 70 families. And, that's a tremendous amount of grief to sit with and to really make you reflect on the consequences. And I know there's probably somebody listening who could just say like, how can you do that and then still think it's okay? And what I can say is that I think that not living, and not being true to some of the things that make me feel like my best self and allow me to show up and be very patient with my children and be very curious with them. I think it's my duty to sort of live my life in that way. And, we cannot prevent death. Like it's one of those things that I got to witness again firsthand working on the ambulance was like so unfair how there's no amount of like risk aversion that is going to prevent your death. And hopefully we all die of like, old age and in good health, but there's a bazillion things that can happen. And again, like I know I'm just justifying my own existence in so many ways, but it does feel important and, for us to be the best people we can to share our lives with our little people.
So we get to bring it full circle and come back to trail running. Adrian and I were talking about your kind of, joy for running lately, it seems. You've always been a runner, but lately you're really becoming a runner. And we were kind of hypothesizing that there's some suffering in it, like mountain climbing, without the risk. Is that a fair reason for why you've been running?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think
partially.
I think for me, it was having this, I love structure. Like I just really love structure. And so in my journey of becoming a parent and sort of like just as the birther of the children, like I had a necessary pause in sort of my like work schedule or like what I would otherwise be doing athletically, and being able to run was something that I could do where I could be gone for just part of a day and not be like on a multi-day trip or like, guiding for 2 weeks in Nepal or whatever, and would give me access. And I started to see trail running as this really cool opportunity to get to be in the mountains and get to challenge myself and have this like beautiful structure of like, well, I can't just go run 200 miles. I have to train to do that. So like it gives me permission to prioritize that in my training. Whereas I think otherwise it would be easy to neglect that part. And so, yeah, I think it has definitely been a less risky way to experience the mountains. And for me, it maybe it's not even risk as much as like independent. Like, as you know, as a parent, like your available hours might not align with like the person who you want to do an activity with. And so being able to have an activity that I can do either with people or alone has been really, really lovely.
That's why I'll never get my pin, because rock climbing requires a partner.
I know. You're like, how do I do this? Yeah, I know. We always have said like climbing is not the hard part, going is. And so that's why going climbing is the actual crux. The going is the crux.
Yes, so true. And do you have any running goals this year? Is there anything you're training towards?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to generally keep my like level of endurance and fitness. And so I do like I've been getting into like really long races, like multi-day, sleepless sufferfests, over 100-mile races and stuff. And I don't know yet, like I'm just right at this point, just with the book and how much work that's going to be and what's going to kind of my schedule is going to look like. But I've been just trying to keep my mileage up and keep myself really well trained so that when that opportunity comes, I can like jump in and say yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to wrap this up because it's been a great conversation and we could keep going on for hours, but we do want to ask for your best Duffel Shuffle story. Think trains, planes, automobiles, and total chaos.
Yeah, I mean, it's, right on the tails of the trail running. So I did this big race in Italy 2 years ago, and it was a 220-ish mile race over the course of 5 days. And it's not the race I wanted to do. I wanted to do this like 300-mile race, but you had to do the 220-mile race to do the 300 miles. And the 300-mile race was super different because it wasn't marked. It wasn't on a course. It was a lot of cross-country movement in the Alpine, various places where you needed crampons. And I was like, this is for me. Like it's a trail run on glaciers. It's called Tour de Glaciers. And so this last summer I trained, now knowing what I knew from having done my first like ultra long multi-day trail race. So I went in with like a little bit more knowledge of how to approach it, and pretty much everything from the get of our departure, 24 hours before our departure, to fly as a family of 4 with a 2-year-old who Arrow's really similar age to Judah, but Judah has been 2 for 77 years. I'm like, are you ever going to turn 3? Like, how are you still 2? I don't understand. But flying with a 2-year-old, we're not quite 2-year-old. Yeah, just turned 2-year-old. My 6-year-old, my husband, his paraglider and like all of his stuff so he can be sane for a month in Europe. And like, I don't know, 12 hours before we left, the baby took a digger into the shoe bench and just like sliced open his forehead, had to get stitches. So you really want stitches right before you get on a plane on a 15-hour flight. Yeah. And then we land and we're going to go stay in Chamonix for a little while. And of course, like one bag arrived with us and it was Tyler's paraglider. It was the paraglider, which like paraglider's not, I mean, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, I'm so glad that paraglider arrived because it would have been even harder without the paraglider. But we had no container for a 2-year-old to sleep in. And so he's just like sleeping in a closet in this Airbnb with me, and like then on the bed and like occasionally just like rolling off. And I'm like, if you break your sutures open, like this is going to be so bad. And then all the way up until 2 days before the race, none of the bags had come. I'm like trying to decide, like, do I buy stuff to do? Because running doesn't take much, but it does take some stuff. And this particular course, so bags did come, got them. I was like, okay, finally, like I can just go. And it'd been pretty chaotic. And I'd been also like having to send the final edit of my book right as we were leaving, which was very high stress as well. And so I just wanted to go and run. I was like, let me go, not sleep for like 7-9 days, however long that's going to be, and just go run. And the first 30 miles of the race, you start in the middle of the night. And so took off and it was like, everything is great. Everything is going wonderful. Got through that night, sunrise the next morning, got to the first glacier descent. And if you want to have a really fun time as a person in mountaineering, going down a glacier with a bunch of trail runners that are not into mountaineering is a fun time. Like it's a pure spectator sport. Just carnage. So much carnage. And like finally for once for me to be like, look, I know how to do this. And I was able to just like bomb down the snowfield, but my ears were popping because of the rapid descent. And I like went to clear my ear and I ruptured my eardrum. And I don't know if you've ever ruptured an eardrum. It is,
very painful.
It's really painful. Yeah, it is really painful. It's like an X-Acto knife being shoved into the side of your head. My ear is bleeding. I'm like, okay, well, it's not going to get more ruptured than this. And so it will heal. But I just was like, I'm going to take the next while and decide if I can stay in the race. And ultimately, over the next 12 hours, I was like, the terrain is too technical. I need like my full focus. And I feel like the universe is just saying like, go get your duffel, shuffle it back home and go home. So, and then I came out and like decided to try to go do a little run and ended up getting, I don't know, food poisoning, I think, and ended up just like so sick for the last 2 days in Europe. It was not a trip I ever want to do again.
This is why we go to Mount Everest. It's so
Seriously,
much simpler.
so much easier. Honestly, if my bags didn't make it to Kathmandu, they would have come the next day. Like Geneva, getting your bags from Geneva
Jiban
is
would
a
have taken
nightmare.
care of you in the interim.
Yeah, I could have. I mean, honestly, I probably have all my stuff stored in Kathmandu. I could figure it out anyway. So, yeah, the misadventures really make the adventures feel like, you discover what you're capable of dealing with. And sometimes that's a fun thing to visit, and sometimes it's not.
Absolutely. That's why the Duffel Shuffle. So the second question we ask every guest, that duffel, as you're packing those duffels for the next adventure with kids, without kids, whatever it might be, what is the first thing you're going to make sure to put in? Like, you will never do a trip without this thing.
I mean, partly because of everything I know about, even if I didn't have kids, but especially in this era with kids, like there will never not be baby wipes. Like never. There will never not be. And they will be in your carry-on and close by, like your life is never going to be without them.
I love that because I literally just stole a bunch of packs of my kids' baby wipes
I know.
for my expedition to Everest. I'm like, one in this bag, one in this bag, two in this bag.
Totally. Your life will never. I mean, the amount of I was traveling by myself for work, and this woman, like, her kid exploded something all over her, and she was like, I was like, would you like some baby wipes? Like, I'm here to save the day. Like, you will make friends. It's so good. They're not just for babies.
Absolutely. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us, of course. Thank you so much for writing this book enough. It really is fantastic and powerful and vulnerable. And, I think I wrote you like, this book is so fun. And you were like, it is? And it's like, but the truth is, it's so serious and it's very real. And at the same time, of course, it's like a great read that I was like along for the ride. And just, even though I know your story, I was wanting to know, how did that work? What happened next? And so I'm just so glad it's out there. So thank you for that. And the mountain misses you. Come see Everest sometime.
I know. I would love to. Yeah, I think it's definitely in the future. My relationship is really intertwined with that place and that mountain. So thank you guys for taking the time and taking such kindness with my story. As you said, the book it's pretty intense and it's really raw and vulnerable, but it's also, a beautiful story of like what can be possible if we're willing to do the work. And so I hope people can take that away, knowing that, it's a happy ending, as they say.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.